How the vision of the angels at the tomb was, the brightness that blinded the Roman soldiers. Year 33 of the Common Era. Jerusalem has just publicly executed a man who claimed to be the Son of God. The body was removed from the cross before sunset, wrapped in linen, scented with approximately 34 kilograms of spices, and placed inside a tomb hewn from the rock. A stone with an estimated weight between 1.5 and 2 tons was rolled to seal the entrance. Roman soldiers were assigned to guard that sepulchre as if it represented a greater threat than any enemy army. And it did. You have likely heard of the resurrection. You have heard that Jesus conquered death. But what few stop to consider is what happened in the minutes preceding the discovery of the empty tomb. There is an event there, recorded in the scriptures, that is so intense and so disturbing that the very soldiers of Rome, men trained to face death without retreating, fell to the ground like corpses, not by a sword, not by an arrow, but by a light. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about now. Before continuing, I must tell you something. Many people know the story of the resurrection of Jesus, but almost no one understands the spiritual depth hidden in the final hours preceding that moment. The words that Jesus pronounced on the cross were not random phrases of a dying man. They were prophetic declarations that shook the spiritual world in a way that most people simply do not perceive. And it is precisely for this reason that I have prepared the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem. In it you will find a profound analysis of each of these words and the impact they had on Jerusalem, on history, and on your own life. To access it right now, it is very simple. Look at the screen. A square code is appearing, the QR code. Take your cell phone, open the camera app and point it at this code. A link will appear on the cell phone screen. Just tap it and you will be directed straight to the book. If you prefer, the link is also in the description of this video. On a cell phone, tap the video title or the More option to open the description. On a computer or television, the link appears just below the video. Thousands of people are already deepening their faith through this reading, and when you access the book, you are also helping to keep this channel active to continue bringing content like this. Access the book and then come back here to comment Amen. Now let us return to that dawn in Jerusalem. To understand what happened at that tomb, you must first understand the political and religious scenario surrounding that moment. Jesus was not executed in secret. His crucifixion took place during the Jewish Passover, a period when the population of Jerusalem jumped from about 40,000 inhabitants to something around 250,000 people. Pilgrims coming from all over Judea, Galilee, Syria, Egypt, Rome. The streets were crowded. Rumors about the man who healed the blind, multiplied bread, and claimed to be the Messiah had been running from mouth to mouth for at least 3 years. The execution was public and brutal. 6 hours nailed to a cross, exposed to the Judean sun with temperatures that at that time of year fluctuated between 28 and 35 degrees. Roman crucifixion was not just a death penalty. It was a spectacle of terror designed to discourage any type of rebellion. The condemned died by slow asphyxiation, needing to push their own body upward, using their nailed feet just to be able to breathe. Each breath was a calculated agony. When Jesus finally died around 3 in the afternoon on a Friday, something strange happened. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, records that the earth shook, rocks split, and the veil of the temple, a curtain approximately 18 meters high and the thickness of an open hand, tore from top to bottom. Not from bottom to top, as would happen if human hands had pulled it. From top to bottom. The Roman centurion who supervised the execution, a man who had likely witnessed hundreds of deaths, pronounced a phrase that remained recorded in history. He recognized that this was no ordinary man. Mark, chapter 15, verse 39, preserves this moment. But the story did not end at the cross. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the very Sanhedrin that had condemned Jesus, made a risky decision. He sought Pilate personally and asked for the body. This was not a trivial act. Publicly associating oneself with one condemned for sedition could cost his position, his reputation, and even his life. Still he went. Nicodemus accompanied him, bringing with him a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing approximately 100 Roman pounds, the equivalent of about 34 kilograms, a quantity that was normally reserved for the burial of kings. Think of the irony of this detail. The man who was executed as a criminal received a burial worthy of royalty. The body was prepared in haste because the Jewish Sabbath was approaching and any work needed to cease before sunset. They wrapped Jesus in linen bandages with the spices and deposited him in a new tomb, hewn from the rock, which had never been used. The stone was rolled, the seal was placed, and then came the guard. Matthew chapter 27 verses 62 to 66 relates that the religious leaders sought Pilate the day after the crucifixion, the Sabbath itself, which shows the level of urgency they felt. They told Pilate that Jesus had predicted his resurrection on the third day. They feared that the disciples would steal the body and proclaim a miracle. Pilate authorized the guard. But what kind of guard was this? A typical Roman guard for this type of mission consisted of a group of 4 to 16 soldiers, organized in shifts. They were not volunteers. They were professional legionaries, part of one of the most disciplined military forces the ancient world has ever known. The Roman Empire controlled a territory of approximately 5 million square kilometers based on this discipline. A soldier who slept at his post could be condemned to death. One who abandoned his position was executed without trial. These men were placed before a sealed tomb with clear orders. No one enters, no one leaves, no violation is tolerated. And there they remained. Friday was gone. The entire Sabbath passed. Hours and hours of silent vigil before a sealed rock in a garden on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Now dimension what was happening behind the spiritual scenes, while those soldiers guarded stone and silence. The scriptures indicate that during that period, something monumental was underway, something that no human eye could witness. The Apostle Peter, in his first letter, chapter 3, verses 18 and 19, makes reference to an activity of Christ during this interval. The body lay in the tomb, but the divine plan was not on pause. It was in execution. But the soldiers did not know this. For them, it was just another mission, perhaps even a mission they considered absurd, guarding a corpse. What threat could come from a dead man? What danger did a body wrapped in linen and locked behind 1.5 tons of limestone represent? The irony was this: they were protecting the world from the event the world needed most. And then came the third day. The dawn of the first day of the week began like any other. Darkness still dominated. The air was cold. Temperatures in Jerusalem at this time of year could drop to about 8 to 10 degrees during the night. The soldiers were at the end of their vigil, likely counting the hours until relief. Then the ground moved. It was not just any tremor. The Gospel of Matthew uses the Greek word seismos megas, a great earthquake. But unlike the common tectonic shifts in the region, this one had a specific epicenter. It was not the earth adjusting itself. It was the earth responding. And in the midst of this shaking, the light came. Try to imagine this. You are in a dark garden surrounded by olive trees and rocks, and suddenly a luminosity that has no visible source begins to condense before your eyes. It does not come from the sky like lightning. It does not come from the horizon like the sunrise. It simply emerges, as if the very air were igniting from the inside out. Matthew chapter 28, verse 3, describes the appearance of the angel. His face was like lightning, and his garments white as snow. But these words are only approximations. Human vocabulary was not built to describe what those men saw. How do you explain a color that does not exist in the visible spectrum? How do you describe a brightness that not only illuminates but penetrates, that passes through the skin, that presses against the chest, that makes every nerve in the body scream to retreat? Lightning lasts fractions of a second. This light remained, and in the center of it, a form materialized. The angel, not an ethereal, translucent figure, fragile as so many artistic representations suggest. A solid, massive presence, radiating an authority that needed no words to be felt. The scriptures indicate that he descended from heaven. He did not walk to the site. He did not emerge from behind the trees. He descended, as if heaven itself had opened a vertical passage to that exact point in the garden. What happened next was swift and definitive. The angel approached the stone that sealed the tomb. That rock, which would need at least 3 to 5 strong men to be moved, was displaced as if it had no weight at all. Imagine someone brushing aside a light fabric curtain with the back of their hand. It was with that naturalness that 1.5 tons of limestone was removed from the entrance of the sepulchre. The sound of the stone scraping against the rock echoed through the garden like dry thunder. And then the angel did something unexpected. He sat upon the stone. He did not enter the tomb. He did not check anything. He did not need to. He sat upon the removed stone with the tranquility of one who knows exactly what is happening. That posture was not casual. It was a declaration. The stone that was meant to seal death now served as a seat for the messenger of life. The seal of Roman authority had been broken. The symbol of human power had become a bench. And the soldiers. The soldiers were destroyed. The biblical text says that they trembled with fear and became like dead men. The Greek word used for trembled is esisthesan, the same root as seismos, earthquake. They did not just feel fear. They were shaken from within, as if the same shock that moved the earth had passed through their bodies. The terror was not psychological, it was physiological. Every muscle locked, every thought dissolved. The capacity to react simply disappeared. These were men who marched onto battlefields without hesitation. Men who had seen comrades die beside them and continued fighting. Men whose training consumed years and whose discipline was maintained under threat of execution. And there they were, on the ground, motionless, defeated without a single weapon being raised against them. What kind of power does that to a Roman soldier? It was not a military defeat. It was a confrontation between dimensions. The power that kept the Roman Empire standing, brute force, discipline, fear, encountered something that operated on a completely different scale. And on that scale, all of Rome's military apparatus was as relevant as a dry leaf before a storm. While the soldiers lay on the ground, the dawn began to lighten the horizon. And in that interval, something silent but equally extraordinary was happening on the other side of the city. A group of women prepared to go to the tomb. Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, Salome, Joanna. The Gospels record different names, but the consensus points to a group of at least 3 to 5 women. They had bought additional aromatic spices to complete the preparation of the body. The burial on Friday had been too hurried. They left home before dawn, walking through the still dark streets of Jerusalem, carrying oils and perfumes. Their concern on the way was practical. Who would roll the stone for them? Mark chapter 16 verse 3 records this conversation. They knew the stone was too large for their strength. They did not know of the Roman guard. They did not know of the earthquake. They did not know that the stone had already been moved. When they arrived, they found the scene transformed. The stone was out of place. The soldiers had either already departed or were still fallen nearby. And there, before them, the angelic presence remained. But the reaction of the women was different from the reaction of the soldiers. They also felt fear. Lucas chapter 24 says they were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but they did not faint. They did not become like dead men. Something in them allowed them to remain conscious before the same presence that had toppled legionaries, and the angel spoke. Fear not. 2 words that appear more than 300 times in the scriptures, in different contexts. But on that dawn, coming from that voice, before that light, they carried a different weight. They were not advice. They were a permission, an opening. As if the angel were saying, "You do not need to fear because you did not come here to fight. You came to love. And love does not need to fall before glory." Then came the central message. He is not here, he has risen. 6 words that divided history into 2 parts. Everything that came before this phrase belongs to a world where death had the final word. Everything that came after belongs to a world where that word was revoked. The angel continued. He invited the women to see the place where the body had been laid. The tomb was empty. The linen bandages were there. John, chapter 20, details that the cloth that covered Jesus' head was folded and separate from the other bandages, not thrown any which way as would happen in a hurried robbery. Folded, set aside. A detail that spoke of order, of intention, of absolute calm. At this point, stop and reflect on something that often goes unnoticed. The final hours of Jesus on the cross, each word he pronounced while he was nailed to that wood, were moments of a spiritual depth that most people have never truly explored. And it is exactly this depth that I have gathered in the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem. If this narrative is touching your heart, the book will take your understanding to a completely new level. Point your cell phone camera at the QR code on the screen or access the link in the video description. By accessing it, you also contribute to this channel continuing to produce content like this. The women ran out. Mark says they trembled and were beside themselves. Luke records that they went to tell the apostles. And the reaction of the apostles? They did not believe. The text is direct. Their words seemed to them like delirium. Peter and John, however, ran to the tomb to check for themselves. John arrived first. He was likely younger, but did not enter. He stayed at the entrance, looking inside. Peter arrived later and entered directly. He saw the linen bandages. He saw the folded cloth, and he left trying to process what that meant. Now turn your attention to the soldiers. What happened to them after they recovered? Matthew chapter 28 verses 11 to 15 tells the outcome. The guards went to the chief priests and reported everything. Everything. The earthquake, the light, the angel, the moved stone, the paralysis, the total inability to fulfill the mission for which they had been designated. The response of the priests reveals more about the event than any confession could reveal. They did not question the account. They did not say the soldiers were making it up. They did not ask for proof. They simply paid. They gave a large sum of money. The Greek text uses agoriaikana. Enough money, a sum generous enough to buy the silence of professional military men. And the instruction was precise. Say that the disciples came during the night and stole the body while you were sleeping. Observe the fragility of this alternative version. First, Roman soldiers sleeping on duty was an offense punishable by death. The penalty was called fustuarium, in which the soldier was beaten to death by his own unit comrades. No legionary would confess this voluntarily unless he had very solid guarantees of protection. Second, if they were sleeping, how did they know it was the disciples who took the body? Third, moving a stone of nearly 2 tons without waking guards trained to react to the slightest noise was logistically absurd. Fourth, the disciples at that moment were hiding, terrified, locked in a room for fear of the authorities. The idea that this terrified group would have executed a night operation under the nose of Rome is, at the very least, fanciful. But the money was accepted. The story was spread. And Matthew records that this version circulated among the Jews until the day he wrote his gospel, likely between 25 and 30 years after the event. The truth, however, did not depend on propaganda. In the days that followed that dawn, Jesus appeared, not once, not in secret. The Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthians about 25 years later, lists the appearances, to Peter, then to the 12, then to more than 500 brothers at once, of whom Paul observes most were still alive when he wrote, as if inviting any skeptic to go and check personally. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last to Paul himself. 500 people at the same time do not have the same hallucination. This is a fact that modern psychology confirms without reservation. Hallucinations are individual, subjective, non-transferable experiences. 500 simultaneous witnesses eliminate this hypothesis definitively. But why did the angel need to open the tomb? This is a question many fail to ask, and the answer is revealing. The angel did not open the tomb so that Jesus could come out. If Jesus could pass through walls, as he did later when he appeared to the disciples in a locked room, according to John chapter 20, verse 19, the stone was not an obstacle for him. The angel opened the tomb so that people could look inside. The stone was removed not to free Jesus, but to reveal his absence. It was visual, tangible, undeniable proof. The empty tomb was the evidence. And the light that blinded the soldiers was not just a visual phenomenon. It was the manifestation of a reality that completely exceeds human capacity to process. The scriptures describe God as dwelling in inaccessible light. First letter to Timothy, chapter 6, verse 16. What the soldiers experienced was a fraction of that reality invading the physical world. Their bodies were not designed to withstand that. Their eyes had no receptors for that spectrum. Their minds had no categories to classify what they witnessed. Why did the soldiers fall and the women remain standing? This difference is not accidental. The soldiers represented human force in its maximum expression, military power, imperial authority, control through violence. The women represented something the ancient world considered insignificant: devotion without power, love without official authority, faithfulness without reward. In the logic of the kingdom of God, these positions are reversed. The power that topples is the same that sustains. The difference lies in the posture of the one who receives it. The soldiers were there to prevent. The women were there to serve. And before divine glory, resistance collapses while surrender remains. There is still a detail that deserves special attention. The Gospel of John records that Mary Magdalene, after the first visit to the tomb, returned alone. She stayed outside, weeping. When she looked into the sepulchre, she saw two angels dressed in white, one sitting where Jesus' head had been, another where his feet had been. They asked why she was weeping. She replied that they had taken her Lord, and she did not know where. Then she turned around, and she saw Jesus, but she did not recognize him immediately. She thought he was the gardener, until he said a single word: Mary. The sound of her own name pronounced by that voice was enough. She recognized him, not by his face, likely transformed after the resurrection, not by his clothes, by the way he said her name. There is something deeply intimate in this detail. Among all the discourses Jesus could have made, among all the proofs he could have offered, he chose simply to pronounce the name of someone who loved him. And that was enough. Mary tried to embrace him. Jesus said not to touch him, for he had not yet ascended to the Father, and then he sent her with a message for the disciples. The first person to see the risen Jesus was not Peter, it was not John, it was not any leader. It was a woman whom the ancient world would not consider a valid witness in any court, and that is exactly the type of inversion that marks the entire gospel narrative. The last are first. The weak confound the strong. Those whom the world discards are those whom God chooses to carry the greatest revelations. What happened that dawn before the tomb was not just a historical event. It was a collision between two kingdoms. The kingdom of men, with its seals, its stones, its spears, its soldiers, tried to contain something that belonged to a completely different order. And it failed. It did not fail by a little. It failed absolutely. The seal was broken, the stone was moved, the guards fell. Death was reversed. The Roman Empire, which at that time controlled the entire Mediterranean, which commanded legions with more than 150,000 active soldiers, which had built more than 80,000 kilometers of paved roads, which maintained its authority over about 65 million people. That same empire could not keep a dead man inside a tomb, and that is the point that changes everything. If the tomb had remained sealed, Christianity would have been just another Jewish sect forgotten by history. But the tomb opened, and from that opening, something began to spread that no army could contain. In 300 years, the very empire that crucified Jesus would adopt his message as its official religion. Constantine, emperor of Rome, would bow before the name of the one whom Rome had nailed to a cross. The light that blinded the soldiers that dawn never went out. It continues to shine, not upon rocks and gardens, but within people who, like those women, choose to go to meet Christ, not with weapons or with power, but with love and with faith. The tomb is empty, and that is the most powerful message the world has ever received. And if this message touched you today, I want to invite you to take one more step. Everything you heard in this narrative points to a single moment, the final hours of Jesus before conquering death. And each word he said on the cross carries a meaning that goes far beyond what most people imagine. In the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, I have gathered a profound analysis of each of these final declarations, what they meant for Jerusalem that day, and what they mean for your life now. To access it, just point your cell phone camera at the QR code appearing on the screen. A secure link will appear automatically. Tap it, and you already begin the reading. If you are on a cell phone watching the video, tap the video title or the More option to open the description, and the link will be there. On a computer or television, just look right below the video. When you access the book, you are also directly helping to keep this channel on the air so that more people can know these truths that transform lives. Access it now, begin the reading, and come back here to comment, Amen.